The 360 on Energy and Carbon, hosted by 360 Energy. When it comes to utility data, there's a common misconception that it's fixed and beyond your control. However, that's far from the truth. 360 Energy has created an innovative AI-powered platform designed to simplify and automate the complex process of energy and emissions data management. Introducing Envirely. Envirely provides organizations with a comprehensive solution enabling efficient management of energy usage, cost reduction, and greenhouse gas emissions reduction in alignment with global standards. Welcome back, Dave and John.
Lysandra, John, it is a joy to be back, and we have a very hot topic from both sides of across the ocean too. This is going to be a really interesting topic.
Yeah, it's good to be back. I love it when we've got guests, but it's equally interesting when we don't, because we can go almost anywhere, can't we?
and John, Lysandra has to kind of helm us in. That's the challenge for her.
I'm worried about this one.
You should be, Lysandra. You should be worried.
Before we started recording, they were already getting into the episode, and I'm like, can we at least hit record before we dive in? So in today's episode, we're diving into a critical but often overlooked issue, energy security. And as we feel, many organizations take energy availability for granted. So to kick off today's episode, how would you define energy security, and why is it becoming a bigger concern now than before?
Okay, I'll kick off. There will be a variety of definitions, and we've got to really try and come up with something that makes sense. And I think energy security is the availability of reliable, well-priced energy to enable you to continue your activity as you would like to. And I think if we put it in that framework, it applies to individuals, corporations, whatever. I think where we have a bit of an issue with it, I know Dave's going to join in with this, I think it comes down, somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was Benjamin Franklin who said we'd only appreciate water when the well runs dry. Most of us in developed countries are used to walking into a room, flipping a light switch, and the lights come on. And that's what we expect, and we take that for granted. That's the real bottom line of energy security. The day we walk into the room, flick the light switch, the light doesn't come on, and it's not because we've blown a fuse or the bulb's gone, it's because there isn't power. That's when we've got a problem with energy security.
Yeah, John, I don't think I have anything more to add. I think the one thing we could talk about is not only security, but sustainability of the energy. That will be something that will be important. So for our listeners, I'm going to give them a sense of why this topic is so important around the world, but also North America. So on July 2nd, 360 Energy was asked to speak to NATO about how to deploy a modern energy infrastructure within the NATO nations. And, immediately people would think, yes, NATO's primarily not only in wartime, but also they're trying to stop wars. That's part of their duties. And clearly we only have to look at the Ukraine and see how bad actors can use energy to influence what you do, what you don't do, and then also influence if actually you can survive and operate. And so that is something that, as John said, we certainly in North America have always taken for granted. Other parts of Europe, reliability of energy has not always been consistent. And hence, I think that's, John, I would say, you and I have had this conversation. That's probably why your culture doesn't take it for granted and you're a little more serious about energy. The other thing you want to know in this discussion, and it was a day-long discussion. There was 36 companies that were asked to speak. We were one of them. And one of the biggest issues that they're also realize is climate change. Climate change is also creating an issue with energy security and the impact on access to energy as well. So not only do you have this possible war or bad actors that are trying to take advantage of people's status with energy or the lack of energy, but you also have the issue of climate change impacting the energy infrastructure. And they were very clear that this is something that they need to deal with because it will no doubt have an impact to nations in NATO on how they operate going forward. So I'm really glad we're having this topic. And John, I know you and I are going to talk about, you have this issue where you have countries that are challenged to have energy. But then we have countries like Canada that many people think or take for granted that we have access to energy. But I spoke with a couple clients last week, and guess what? They can't get more energy. They want to put some more equipment in. They can't get it, and it won't be available for 2 or 3 years. That's already happening in Canada, where we think we have this abundance. So it's a huge topic.
Yeah, and I think riding on the back of that, you talking about NATO, I think what we have to bear in mind in the modern world, but energy is a strategic issue. It can be, for want of other words, a weapon of war, or denial of energy can be used as a weapon of war. It's also used as a weapon of oppression. And we can think there are other circumstances going on in the Middle East. There's Gaza. One of the things that's being done there as a military option is trying to cut off basic utilities to a part of a country.
Yes.
So
yes.
At that level, it's funny, isn't it? We've always thought this with energy. Energy is so important, and we live and breathe it. And then people just thinking, oh, it's not a problem. And then something happens, and it's, oh my goodness, what's going on here?
Think of how ill-equipped we are to handle it, even in our personal lives. Like, think at home right now, if we had no access to energy, how long would we be able to survive? Because we've been so used to it. I even think of people that have very high-tech homes with electric can openers that you plug in. Like, if something happens, how are you having access to your food? I always think about, we had a huge outage. I think it was like 2003. So I would have been around 5 years old. And I remember we used our barbecue for a couple days to boil pasta on the stovetop with the propane tank, right? Yeah. But I just think of, if we just even zone in on our own individual lives and say, okay, if we didn't have power for 1 week, how would we survive? Are we prepared for that? Or are we just so reliant that, the electricity is always going to be there? The natural gas is always going to be there.
Yeah, and just think, I had a practical thing yesterday. I've done one of these things. I've got bundled internet, phone, TV and everything. I changed providers. Oh dear. But we had it coincidental with that. I thought there's something wrong here, cell phone signal. And it turned out that the local tower had been shut down, for improving the service. And so I had 24 hours where I had to rely on Wi-Fi rather than mobile phone signal. Was I stressed out? Well, and you only have to draw back from it a minute and you go, hold on, real first world problem. But it gives us a flavour, as you say, because we are becoming more and more tech-based. We're becoming more and more electricity driven.
Yes.
And if we lose electricity supplies, we can easily cripple a society. And it can either be through, I'm going to say, conventional warfare or terrorism. That's, another potential threat to energy security.
Now, I do want to convey, like, Lysandra, you're absolutely right. We live in we're very lucky where we live in Ontario and Canada, but you don't have to, there's parts of the north, and you don't have to go really that far. First Nations, where availability of energy or electricity is very challenging, really expensive, and not have access to water or clean water that they can drink. There are people in this country that do not have access. And by the way, haven't. It's not consistent, not reliable. It's really, so this is why I think, and I conveyed this to NATO, I believe they could be a catalyst to actually help things change around the world. Because in my view, I know we've talked about this before, may not be seen overly popular, but the current energy ecosystem does not move that quickly. And truthfully, they don't want to disrupt their model. They want to keep the model the way it is. And they're not moving quick enough, and it probably won't work with the speed of how things have to happen. So I do believe, and I think NATO could be a great catalyst to actually advance this type of thought process.
Yeah, and we're talking about...
It's interesting. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, we're talking about, how important it is or everything. And I just scribbled a note here to share something with you. We, in this country, we've had a government ministry that's looked after energy in one way or whatever. way back when I started in the business, we had the very simple Department of Energy. And then it went through, some of it got into environment and everything else. And then before the current format, we had the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, which all sounded good. That has been changed. Our government department responsible for energy now is the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero.
Yes.
And that's because I don't know how much of that is the political one, because net zero is a bit of, as we know, has become a political football. But I don't think, and this is perhaps where energy security is a good thing to talk about, I don't think there's anybody who's going to deny that we don't need energy security.
Yeah.
It's a common ground we can all sign up to. We want good, reliable supplies of energy on demand.
I think the groups that have experienced energy insecurity, whether it be companies trying to get more energy or areas that do not have energy security today, are the best prepped for this.
Yeah.
I think of companies that even we've dealt with, if they weren't able to get their power on immediately, they came up with strategies. They've thought about this already. Those companies that have been around for so long have always had access to the energy that they have, maybe because they were the first company in the area and were able to consume whatever they want. But they're going to have the most challenging time with this because they have no idea what energy insecurity would look like. And I think of even the Texas major outage in 2021, or in BC when we had those climate change floods. All these companies now had to change their headset and adapt to a major disaster. And that, I think, puts them ahead of, all of us who have been lucky to sit there with no climate change issues or no energy security issues.
Yeah, you've got a point. We had a very interesting energy security issue with Heathrow Airport a while back. And there was a lot of argument around, it was the grid, it was the infrastructure that was the problem. It would appear, after research has been done into it, the site had dual supplies. What the problem was that the management there, shall we say in the broadest sense, wasn't prepared for a significant outage. They thought they were, but when the power dropped, their ability to do something about it was seriously questioned.
So we have a real live example. I'll be cautious. There's some sensitivity to this. We work with a client. We've had this client for a long time, a major automotive player, let's just put it that way. And they were looking at a massive expansion because of the world's changing, and they're looking at changing their platform and how they operate. And they were going to do a massive investment here in Canada. And they, like every industry, the industry tends to move fast, much faster than the current the energy ecosystem infrastructure. And so they wanted to have this build multiple plants, by the way, within 4 years.
Wow.
And the issue they found is that we can't do it. Sorry, maybe 5 years. Well, we can do it for 10 years. But industry doesn't work that way. They can't go, I'll just sit tight. These people have to produce product to make money to stay in business. So when a government or governing agencies say, too bad, so sad, that's not the country or the jurisdiction you want to be in. You want to be in a jurisdiction that will move and is open and receptive to that thinking. And that's a good example of, because the world's changing. And industry is changing I would say much faster than, I'm talking about manufacturing, much faster than the current energy ecosystem. And I wish and hope that the energy ecosystem is listening and understanding that their model has to move faster. And that is another example of energy security or not having access to energy, which could impact the economics, not only of that corporation, the communities, but also the country that you're in. So it's really important.
So we're agreed. It's important.
I think we spent 15 minutes talking about how we all agree on the first question.
But I don't know if those examples people really understood until we spoke about them.
For sure. Yeah. On that note, do you think most businesses are underestimating the risks around energy availability, and what do you think they're missing?
I'll speak from our side, from our experience. I think most companies think that they just plug into the power lines and they get the power. I don't think they really, really, truly understand what's involved and the challenges going forward with the incremental power, especially with the issue of customers now reducing their need for fossil fuel and electrifying. So more and more companies are doing this, which is putting more stress on the grid. I don't think companies realize that's happening and the impact it's having on the grid and how it's going to impact that. That's my opinion. John, I'd like to hear what you see in Europe.
I was thinking, how can we look at something that helps us understand whether people are identifying and doing something about the risk? You know, in health and safety, you have risk assessments and you sort of say, oh, what might happen? How disastrous would it be? What's the likelihood of it happening? And you develop an indicator, a matrix, or for whatever. And I was thinking, can I think of something that tells me how seriously some companies take energy security? And it's the issue of, certainly for here, standby generation. Now, I've done work with data centres from the small to the very large. And guess what? Energy is quite important to them. And what do they have? A massive bank of standby generation available that they test and run, but they hope they won't have to run it, but it's there. I think you can reflect whether this is similar in Canada, North America. Hospitals will tend to have some element of standby generation, maybe not for it all, but some. Some people, though, are beginning to put in more. They've come across uninterruptible power supplies for IT equipment, and they're thinking, maybe there's a case for that. But I think where we've gone, most commercial buildings and many manufacturing buildings look at the cost of providing a redundancy of power supply, do some quick maths on it and go, it's not worth it. When did we last have a real problem with this?
Now, Lysandra, your exposure in the utility industry, I'm going to say there's jurisdictions, Ontario's one of them, that now there's a requirement for the different utilities to actually show capacity constraints in real time for their jurisdictions. So there's a map that most utilities need to provide to their customers. Now, the truth is most customers won't even know what that map means. And just for our listeners, the capacity constraints is just saying that effectively in certain areas in the utilities grid that it's very tight. And so if there was more power demanded, it wouldn't be available. And so, again, I think most customers wouldn't be aware of that. But there are jurisdictions, and Ontario is one of them, which I would say good on them that they're now making that transparent. I just don't think customers actually know what it is and that they even know where to look.
Yeah, I think that, the independent electricity system operator and the energy boards, they're always talking about things and potentially introducing new things to utilities. I know something that we are at least preparing for is the model of becoming a DSO. And that's really something that we see the ISOs potentially putting forward. And a DSO is a distribution system operator. So really we would be looking at getting capacities from neighboring generation and also putting that onto our grid and distributing it to customers. That's something that's not happening today in utilities in Ontario, but it is something that we potentially see ISOs pushing forward to utilities of taking on that responsibility. And to be fair, no utility is prepared for that today.
I agree. And so what does this mean to our listeners? What it means is instead of this whole centralized grid, which still will be a major issue, you will now have localized distributed area where people could be generating power for that local area or others. They'll be encouraging that type of thought process, not just relying on the big nukes, the hydraulics, but there could be generation within a jurisdiction like Windsor, or places that would be quite unique. And I think that's the future model. And again, I want to come back to NATO. That's where they're going. They're looking at how they can modernize this whole energy infrastructure and to do it quickly as well.
Can I take us somewhere on this? I was trying to sort of think, how could we make it look tidy about some of this? Really, energy security, the way I'm going to put it, there are what I'm going to call internal issues and external issues. So, external issue, somebody has a gas pipeline supplying Europe and they get into a conflict with Europe and they shut down the pipeline. That's an external threat and an external issue. What we've been talking about partly here there is also the internal issue, which is we are moving towards a more electrified future. And I don't know if the figures would be similar for North America, but here We have a lot of our domestic heating is through gas-fired furnaces, gas-fired boilers. And it's estimated that if we got a 90% uptake of, say, heat pumps, we might be looking anywhere between a 25 and 50% increase in electricity supply needed. And importantly, there would be issues with peak demands. So we've got these, if you like, calling them threats. It's a bit like when you're doing a strengths, weakness, opportunity and a threat analysis. We've got these internal ones, which are where we put more demand on the system, and the system doesn't have the strength to deliver it. And then we've got the external ones, which would be an act of war, act of terrorism, and it might not be direct. Don't we notice every time there's a kickoff in the Middle East, oil prices start going funny places, and that can have an impact on power generation, etc., and it can trickle through that way. So I think we need to see that, and I think the reason I'm putting it that way, there's things that our own governments and our businesses and our utilities can do, certainly, to try to address the internal issues. We probably will always have the external risk that, and that's one of those things. It's the insurance thing, isn't it? What's the likelihood of it happening? What can we do about, when you've got a risk, you try to mitigate it. And if you can't mitigate it, you go, well, what's the impact of it? We can't, as individuals, we can't mitigate global conflict.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something great, because it's something that we're touching on, but we're not really explicitly saying. There's energy security in the sense of, okay, are you getting your energy from an import from a different country? Then ding, 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 make sure you're paying attention to the political aspect. Now, if you are receiving your energy, just internally from your own country, from your own jurisdiction, then you're also thinking about things like climate change and natural disasters and things like that could impact your energy security. So it is a really good point, especially because, as we could see a couple months ago when the conflict between Canada and the US began, one of the first topics was, we'll stop exporting our energy to you. So that is a prime example of energy security.
Can I ask you a question on this? We have very limited hydropower in the UK. We do have some. You have quite a lot of it. How under threat is hydropower from climate change?
It's impacted, John. I was involved in the University of Windsor, and when they did look like, so certainly the lack of precipitation has a huge impact, or snowfall or whatever, right? So it has a massive impact. People, again, don't realize or don't think about it because they don't realize how important that is. So no, that's my view. Lysandra, do you have any thoughts as well?
No, I agree to that. And I also think it's interesting because jurisdiction we're in, although I find people do tend to complain about energy prices, I believe that they're very fair and reliable for what customers get. So I think sometimes I sit there and I'm like, do companies sit there and ask themselves, have you ever had your power randomly go off for a long period of time? If the answer is no, you're lucky. 2, have you ever had to pay extraneous amounts for energy? And I'm saying you used a little bit and you paid a ton of money? Probably no. So you're also lucky. So I think a lot of people sit there and they think, we're paying so much on this and paying so much on that, but they're really narrow-minded in that thinking. Of course, if you based your company, you based your business in a certain area, you want the best price. You don't really care what's happening in a different province or state or country. But also, it is kind of an indicator of, if we're paying much less than the rest of the world, what does this mean for the future? And why are we paying so much less than the rest of the world?
Yeah, there's an interesting one there. There's a pricing model that was done. We have a free market on electricity, but we have a regulator, and the regulator has various models to look at what you should charge per kilowatt hour, so to speak. I don't think it's very transparent, but it was there. One of the questions when they're looking at price caps and things like that is taking into account how much is a consumer prepared to pay for the reliability of the supply. Because you've got to spend some money on its reliability. You could shave your utility costs right the way down and have an intermittent supply. And most consumers would But because we're used to having reliable supplies, we don't think of that as being part of the equation, that you've got to pay for, if you like, the primary energy that's come in, the distribution of it, and investment in the system to make sure that it can meet the needs.
Yeah, I'd like, if I could, because we talked about access to energy, but there's also cybersecurity issues with energy.
Yes.
And which, again, was kind of being addressed with NATO, because you can imagine the availability and accessibility. Maybe it's not surprising to our listeners, but in war, they use a lot of energy. The type of energy they are using is changing dramatically. They're talking about troops carrying battery packs for electronics, things of that nature. But then the issue is ensuring that the security of that electrical power is not being interrupted, or cybersecurity isn't impacting. And that's another piece that's an issue. Just before I flew out, I was reading a piece on LinkedIn. It came from an American that was conveying 75% of transformers comes from China. And that China has actually figured out that where there's weak spots in the transformer pieces, if there was bad actors, they could actually take action to mitigate or have an impact on those different transformers. The insurance industry knows about this, and this is why some of the times they're not insuring customers on the reliability of power. So cybersecurity is a massive issue that needs to be also factored. We're living in this world that's changing dramatically. This is something else that has to.
I mean, this is one of the things, when we haven't got a guest, we can go into areas that are a bit risky, can't we? And there is this ongoing concern about how China may or may not be a bad actor in things. I've done work for a Chinese company that are involved in security systems, print recognition, CCTV and things like that. And everyone's going, oh, where are we with that? But think of it as well. We have a nuclear power station build that is being financed by the Chinese.
Yes.
And the questions are, have they got a back door? Could they switch a switch? I don't know. I mean, one view you could take of, is China a bad actor? They don't need to be. They are becoming so economically powerful, and we are so dependent on them. What advantage would they gain from being able to do this? That's one view.
Yeah, and John, I want to make sure I'm not trying to specific. This person did talk about China, but it could be other actors, right? Well, it could be other actors.
Yes, for legal reasons and everything else, we are merely using China as an example of could go on, and we're not saying one way or the other.
That's right.
Anything, we can neither confirm nor deny that anything is wrong there. Right. But the other view, I was going to say, the counter view is, have you ever? I'm going really off-piste here. Have you ever watched the American crime series Person of Interest?
I think I watched a couple of
shows. In this, a computer system is developed post 9/11 that links into all emails, CCTV things, everything else. And the idea of it is to be able, it was early days in terms of where we are now, talking about using artificial intelligence to predict where the next terrorist attack might be. It is available on many video platforms. The guy who built it left himself a back door because he was worried if the government misused the system, that he wanted to be able to do something about it. And you watch that and you think, well, that seems quite logical. So that's the counter argument to there not being back doors into. I know I'm taking it from TV drama, but and I think that is the problem. I think China, you look at it now, who's leading in electric vehicles in Europe? China. Who's leading in solar panel production?
China.
And so on. I was out doing a job in the Philippines. Who was building a state-of-the-art coal-fired power station for them? China. Yeah. China is a big technological player. China now, I think, is filing more patents than the US.
Yeah, I'm not going to say anything on that one.
So where I'm going with this is, we can't do anything about those things. Just as we're kicking a ball round here, having a bit of soccer practice with it. It's the kind of thing, trying to get us back on stream here. It's the kind of thing. There should be sensible discussions along these lines in C-suites.
Well, yes, and I'm going to come back. So with NATO, the technology that they're using and want to use, whether it's nanotechnology or whatever, not only are they looking at this reliability and getting it up, but also the security, so there aren't bad actors that could negate that technology, right? And so everything is done. And the other thing, maybe not a surprise to you, there are certain countries they'll deal with, and there's certain countries they won't in this application. That's how it works.
Now, we spent a lot of time talking about what we can't control. What steps should clients be taking now to protect themselves from energy disruptions or price volatility when it comes to energy security?
Do you want I'll start off, John?
Yes, you start, Dave.
Okay. So first of all, I think they need to take stock, really what they have, from the equipment to I'm talking about manufacturers. I could talk about greenhouse, but let's use manufacturers. They need to understand the equipment they have. They need to understand the energy infrastructure they currently have, because I have found that they don't actually understand their capacity, not only as John said, internal, but also external to them. Like what does the grid or the natural gas pipe? So they need to be very mindful of what they should be checking yearly on that status, because that's changing. They should, as John said, I think we've been very fortunate in North America, Canada, reliability. I think they should start now thinking about the impacts of being disrupted, interrupted. Should they have backup power? Should they arrange to have backup power in place if there's a major issue? So I think all the things that they've never done before, they need to start looking at and putting this in place and have a game plan. Don't take it for granted the world is status quo, because it's not. You need to be much more, in North America, very mindful of what you've got and what you need, and be much more proactive. Don't sit back. Don't rely on others. You need to be more actively involved in planning and managing energy. Again, I would say North Americans are not that active in managing. And don't be reliant on the utility or your energy suppliers to take care of this, because the demands that I see coming and are already happening, they won't be able to keep up with it. So you're going to have to be a lot more literate and be well versed in this whole piece. That would be my take.
Okay, I'm going to go back to something I touched on. Most corporations are used to doing some kind of risk assessment, and I think applying risk assessment thinking to energy security is a critical part. And it starts simply, and I can remember in early days doing energy consultancy work when somebody was saying, well, we're not really that bothered about energy. And I said, well, if we phoned up the chief engineer and told him to throw the main breaker switch down in the substation, what impact would that have? Oh, well, now you're being silly. But what would happen if there was an outage? How long could you operate with that outage? Are the systems that you have in place resilient enough to operate? All of us back our data up, don't we? But how often do we check it's been backed up properly? If we've got good regimes in place, we do. But typically you think, oh yes, it's automatically backing up. Your system goes down and then you look for it. So the idea of maybe even simulating an outage or doing other things like that to see how you respond, have you got the systems in place, looking for alternatives. And here we can fly one little flag, of course. If you start moving on to on-site generation, maybe renewables, wind turbines, solar, battery backups and things like that, all of that can give you resilience, which can help protect you against energy insecurity. But just go back to the beginning, it's develop some kind of risk management approach to energy security.
Yep, I agree, John. It's realizing the world's changing, that you're going to have to change with it, and don't take the energy ecosystem in your plant and outside your plant for granted.
Well, this has been a great episode on energy security. To end off this episode, what is the biggest takeaway for our listeners?
John?
Okay, you've been used to flicking the switch and getting the power. Will that always happen? And if it doesn't happen, what are you going to do?
I'm going to say that this distributed, I think we've talked about this before, this distributed energy infrastructure that Lysandra's talked about, certainly NATO's addressing, that will be that's a whole new game and will be a bigger part, and that's something that customers will need to understand what it is and how they will have to play in it. That, to me, will be the big change. Lysandra.
Yeah, I think we talk about the cost of energy security, but we don't talk about the cost of energy insecurity. So
nice, Lysandra.
Yeah, I think take a look and see the little moves back there. I would say take a look and see how much would your business suffer if you didn't have energy security.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, that's the flip side of how much you should be investing in energy security.
Yeah.
Great way to end off.
All right, Dave, John, thanks for another great episode.
It's been fun.
It has. And we only did it in 40 minutes too, Lysandra.
Sorry, Alana.
How many questions? 2, 3?
Have a great week, everyone.
Thanks.
Yeah. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
That's all for today's episode of the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast. Thanks for listening. Make sure to check us out on our website at 360energy.net and follow us on LinkedIn at 360 Energy Inc. Tune in to our podcast on Apple Music, Spotify, Anchor, or other listening platforms by searching the 360 on Energy and Carbon. You can watch the video recording and subscribe on YouTube at 360 Energy Inc. Email us your feedback at podcast@360energy.net or comment on our LinkedIn posts. See you next week.